Welcome. Today, we shall see an interesting science facts which would make your night more exciting. Before that, do subscribe if you like our content, and let's move on to the topic. Close your eyes and imagine drifting quietly through space, where the planets move with a patience so deep. It feels like time itself slows down just to watch them. Mercury, the smallest and closest to the Sun, experiences days that last longer than its years, reminding us that speed and slowness can exist together without conflict. Venus, wrapped in thick clouds, spins so gently and in the opposite direction that the Sunday would appear to rise in the west. A calm reversal that feels like nature deliberately choosing a different rhythm. Earth, our home, hums silently through space at thousands of kilometers per HR, yet we feel none of it. Oceans staying in their beds, mountains standing still, teaching us that great motion doesn't always need to be felt to be real. The moon, quietly locking itself to Earth, always shows the same face, a cosmic promise kept for billions of years without words. Mars glows softly red, not because it is angry or dangerous, but because iron dust covers its surface like ancient rust, as if the planet itself is resting after a very long life. Jupiter, the giant, holds more mass than all other planets combined, and yet floats effortlessly, its enormous storms lasting centuries, including a great red spot that has been calmly swirling since before humans first looked up at the sky. Saturn wears its rings not as decoration, but as a reminder that even debris can arrange itself into breathtaking order, countless icy particles circling in harmony without ever colliding into chaos. Uranus lies on its side, rolling around the Sunday like a slow, gentle tumble, proving that even extreme imbalance can still result in a stable, peaceful orbit. Neptune, far and blue, moves so slowly that it completes one orbit in the time it takes human civilizations to rise and fall, while its fierce winds howl endlessly in silence, never disturbing anything beyond itself. Every planet follows invisible paths carved by gravity, never touching, never crashing, maintaining respectful distances like dancers in a perfectly rehearsed performance. None of them rush, none of them hesitate, they simply are, moving because movement is part of their nature. Planets do not compete for light, attention, or importance. Each content in its own role, whether blazing hot, frozen cold, massive or small. Even in the vast emptiness between them, space is not truly empty but filled with faint sunlight, soft radiation, and drifting particles, creating a quiet background hum to the universe. The planets have witnessed the birth and death of stars, the formation of moons, and the slow reshaping of themselves. Yet they never react with urgency or fear. They accept impacts, erosion, storms, and silence with the same steady presence. Some planets have clouds of ammonia, others clouds of sulfuric acid, some none at all. Yet each atmosphere rests naturally around its world, never questioning its form. Gravity keeps everything gently bound, not as a force of violence, but as a soft pull, a reminder that connection does not need effort to exist. When sunlight reaches a planet, it takes minutes or hours to arrive, spreading softly across surfaces that have waited patiently for it, absorbing warmth without demand. Night on any planet is not darkness in fear, but darkness in rest, stars shining clearly, where no air scatters their light. The planets do not age the way living things do. They change slowly, almost imperceptibly, over millions of years, teaching a kind of patience that feels deeply comforting. Even destruction in space happens slowly, with grace, dust settling into new shapes rather than vanishing. The planets remind us that existence does not require constant action, that being present in a stable orbit, day after day, is enough. They show that extremes can be peaceful, that intense heat, deep cold, powerful gravity, and endless silence can all coexist without conflict. As they glide endlessly around the Sunday, never early, never late, the planets quietly suggest that there is no need to hurry, because the universe itself is unhurried, vast, and endlessly calm. Imagine continuing that slow drift, letting the mind loosen as the planets keep circling in their ancient patterns, never questioning where they are going. Far from urgency, every orbit is a gentle agreement between motion and balance, a silent understanding maintained for billions of years. The planets do not mark time with calendars or clocks. Their sense of time is written in shadows, stretching across surfaces, in seasons that last decades, in slow tilts and subtle changes that feel more like breathing than movement. On gas giants, clouds stack endlessly, layer upon layer, forming soft gradients of color that blend without sharp edges, storms rising and fading like thoughts that pass without attachment. On rocky worlds, dust settles patiently after winds calm, leaving landscapes unchanged for lifetimes, as if nothing ever needed to be fixed. Moons glide alongside their planets like quiet companions, never speaking, never leaving, each one tracing a familiar path that feels safe simply because it is known. Some moons are frozen solid, others hide oceans beneath ice, yet all remain calm in the cold, carrying secrets without urgency to reveal them. Light from the Sunday reaches each planet differently, thinner and softer the farther it travels, never demanding attention, just arriving when it arrives. Space between worlds stretches wide and open, offering room to breathe, reminding us that distance can be comforting rather than lonely. There is no noise in space as we know it, only silence so complete. It feels like rest itself, broken only by imagination. The planets exist without approval, without observation, and yet continue flawlessly, showing that purpose does not require an audience. Even when collisions happen, they unfold over immense timescales, energy spreading outward, debris slowly finding new homes, chaos gently resolving back into order. Nothing is wasted. Even fragments become rings, moons, or dust that feeds future worlds. Temperatures swing wildly on some planets, yet these extremes are steady and predictable, not stressful, not alarming, simply part of how those worlds exist. The universe does not rush to correct imbalance. It allows things to settle naturally, trusting gravity, time, and space to do their work. Planets spin without effort, held in place by invisible forces that feel more like reassurance than restraint. Shadows slide slowly across craters, plains, and clouds, marking the passage of time without pressure. There is comfort in knowing that long after any single moment passes, the planets will still be there, moving exactly as they always have. They do not worry about the future or replay the past. They remain fully present in each rotation, each orbit, each silent glide. Their existence suggests that stability is not stiffness, but gentle repetition, and that peace can be found in returning to the same path again and again. Watching them, even in thought, softens the idea that everything must change quickly to matter. The planets teach that slow change is still change and still meaningful. They remind us that it is okay to take time, to move quietly, to exist without constant proof of progress. In their endless circling, they hold a kind of cosmic lullaby, a reassurance that the universe is not frantic or harsh at its core, but steady, spacious, and calm, inviting us even briefly to match their pace and rest within the rhythm of it all. Let that calm stretch even further, as if the universe itself is gently exhaling and inviting you to follow. Each planet carries the memory of its creation in silence, shaped from swirling dust and gas that slowly learned how to settle, how to become something whole without force. Nothing about a planet's birth was rushed. Gravity gathered material patiently, grain by grain, until balance naturally formed. Even now, planets continue that lesson, holding themselves together not by tension, but by quiet equilibrium. Their paths never cross in panic, never swerve suddenly, never demand attention. They simply curve smoothly through space, trusting the invisible structure that holds everything in place. When a planet tilts, it does so gently, creating seasons that arrive and leave without apology, long winters and endless summers flowing naturally into one another. On some worlds, dawn lasts for days, sunlight creeping slowly over the horizon, shadows retreating with unhurried grace. On others, night stretches so long it feels eternal, stars hanging motionless in crystal clarity, offering light without warmth, beauty without demand. Planets accept whatever surrounds them, whether bombarded by radiation or wrapped in thick clouds, never resisting their environment, only adapting over immense spans of time. Even the harshest landscapes are calm in their stillness, deserts of rock and ice resting undisturbed for millions of years. There is no wasted movement in space. Every spin, every orbit has meaning simply by existing. The planets do not strive to become something else. Mars does not wish to be Earth. Earth does not envy Jupiter, and Jupiter does not feel burdened by its size. Each world is complete as it is, balanced in its own way, reminding us that comparison has no place in true stability. Light reflects softly off surfaces and clouds, drifting outward into space, carrying no message except that something exists here quietly. Even gravity, often imagined as heavy or crushing, works with gentleness across distance, holding moons close without pulling them in, allowing freedom within connection. Over billions of years, planets cool, crack, erode, and reshape themselves, never mourning what they once were, never fearing what they will become. Change happens so slowly it feels more like deep rest than transformation. The universe gives planets all the time they need, and more, never interrupting, never urging them. Let it keep flowing, without any sense that it needs to arrive somewhere different. The planets continue as they always have, not because they are compelled, but because continuation itself is gentle. Nothing strains to keep going. Nothing fears stopping. Motion and rest overlap so completely that they become the same thing. A planet can move millions of kilometers and still feel as set out there. Nothing feels watched. Existence is private, unobserved, free from evaluation. The planets do not perform their paths, they inhabit them. There is no audience to impress, no standard to meet. That absence of observation feels deeply soothing, like finally being alone without being lonely. Space allows things to exist exactly as they are, without. The universe also feels endlessly patient with silence. Silence is not treated as a gap or a problem, it is the default state. Sound is the exception, not the rule in that quiet. Nothing startles the senses. Nothing demands immediate attention. Awareness can rest without being pulled in multiple directions. Silence becomes a place rather than an absence. Even distance loses its sharpness. Far away does not mean unreachable or cold. It simply means spacious. The planets are far apart because space allows them to be. That distance keeps everything calm, preventing friction, allowing movement to remain smooth. Nearness and distance are both balanced states, each with their own quiet comfort. Time continues to widen until it knows. Instead, it feels like something you are inside of. Moments do not tick away. They unfold gently, one blending into the next. Nothing is lost when a moment ends because it dissolves naturally into what follows. There is no abrupt cutoff, no sense of falling behind. Everything flows forward without leaving anything unfinished. The planets never carry Each turn is complete. Each orbit closes softly into itself. There are no unfinished cycles, no loose ends trailing behind. Completion happens continuously, not as a final event but as a constant state. That ongoing completeness feels deeply restful, like knowing nothing important has been forgotten. As this calm continues, even the idea of effort. The planets do not expend energy trying to exist. Existence is supported automatically. Forces cooperate instead of compete. Gravity holds without gripping. Motion continues without pushing. Everything feels shared, distributed, balanced. No single thing carries the weight alone. The mind, staying with this image, naturally mirrors it. Thoughts, the need to decide or conclude fades. Awareness becomes broader, softer, less concerned with edges or outcomes. There is nothing to solve here, nothing to prepare for. The present moment is wide enough to hold everything comfortably. Nothing here seeks resolution. There is no final calm waiting at the end. Calm is not a destination. It is the background state that never leaves. The planets move within it, wrapped in it, supported by it, without ever naming it. They do not reach peace. They simply express it by continuing. And so it goes on, quietly, endlessly, without crescendo or closure. The planets glide, the light drifts, the darkness opens, time stretches, space holds, nothing presses, nothing pulls too hard. Everything has room. Everything has time. Everything is already enough. The calm does not deepen or fade. It remains steady and spacious, like an orbit that never needs to stop, carrying everything gently forward, forever unhurried. Let it continue in the same quiet way, without gathering intensity or asking for attention. The planets move as if they are resting inside their motion, supported on all sides by something that never wavers. Nothing tightens around them. Nothing slips. Their paths feel wide and forgiving, like curves drawn slowly in soft sand, rather than lines carved into stone. Even if something were to change, it would change gently, with time smoothing every edge. Out there, Nothing feels rushed because nothing feels scarce. There is always more space, more time, more silence. The universe does not run out of calm. It does not need to conserve it. Calm is the default state, endlessly available, stretching farther than thought can follow. The planets exist inside this abundance, never needing to compete, never needing to hurry before something disappears. The idea of pressure simply doesn't fit here. No moment is overloaded. No phase carries more responsibility than it can hold. Everything is spread evenly, like weight distributed across a wide surface so nothing sinks too deeply. Even change is distributed this way, so slow, so gradual, that it feels more like settling than shifting. Nothing tips suddenly, nothing collapses. The planets never rehearse their next move. They do not plan their rotations or check their orbits. They trust the same quiet structure that has always guided them. That trust feels absolute. Not because it is hopeful, but because it has never been broken. The next moment arrives smoothly every time. The universe has never missed a beat. Silence continues to feel rich rather than empty. It holds motion the way night holds stars, without effort, without commentary. In that silence, nothing is interrupted. Thoughts can drift without being pulled back. Awareness can widen until it feels like it has no edges. Nothing needs to be named or understood to feel complete. Even extremes lose their sharpness here. Heat is steady, cold is steady, darkness is steady, light is steady. When things are stable, they stop feeling threatening. The planets exist inside conditions that would seem intense up close. Yet from within their own rhythm, everything feels calm. Stability is what transforms intensity into peace. Time no longer feels like something counting down. It feels like something holding everything up from beneath. Moments don't fall away. They dissolve gently into one another. Nothing is lost when a moment ends. It simply becomes part of the wide continuity that keeps going without interruption. There is no gap where anxiety can slip in. The planets also show how nothing needs constant correction. Small imbalances are absorbed naturally. Tiny variations smooth themselves out over long spans. Perfection is not required for harmony. Things are allowed to be slightly uneven, slightly off, slightly imperfect, and still everything holds. That allowance feels deeply reassuring. As this calm continues, even the sense of self softens. There is less need to define, to evaluate, to move towards something specific. Existence becomes simpler. Just being inside the moment, supported, unpressured. Like a planet, you don't need to know the entire path to continue along it. You only need to exist where you are, and that is already enough. Nothing here ends. Nothing concludes. The calm does not build to a peak or fade away. It remains steady. The planets keep circling. Light keeps drifting. Darkness keeps opening. Space keeps holding. Time keeps allowing. There is no signal to stop. No requirement to finish the thought. Like an orbit, the feeling simply loops back into itself, smooth and uninterrupted. And in staying with that loop, even briefly, it becomes clear that calm is not something added to life. It is something already beneath it, carrying everything gently forward, endlessly without hurry. Let it keep easing forward, the way a slow wave crosses a quiet lake without ever needing to announce itself. The planets remain exactly where they are meant to be. Not because they chose it, but because the universe naturally arranged things in a way that works. There is a deep comfort in knowing that balance does not have to be earned. It exists first, and everything else simply rests inside it. Nothing is constantly correcting itself. Nothing is anxious about drifting too far. The structure holding everything together is gentle, but it is also unwavering. Out there, nothing is sharp. Even the idea of direction feels soft. Forward does not feel different from backward. Both are part of the same smooth curve. The planets never experience sudden turns or jolts. Their motion is continuous, flowing like a long breath that never catches. This smoothness settles the imagination, making it easier to release the idea that life must be made of sharp moments or decisive pushes. Sometimes continuity itself is enough. The universe does not crowd moments together. There is space between every event, every change, every shift. That space acts like padding, absorbing impact, keeping everything gentle. Even when something significant happens, it unfolds slowly enough to be understood without shock. Nothing arrives uninvited or unprepared. Time makes room before anything enters. The planets also exist without tension between individuality and belonging. Each one is completely itself, yet perfectly integrated into a larger system. They do not lose their identity by being part of something vast. They do not strain to stand out. That quiet coexistence feels deeply soothing, like knowing you can belong without blending away, and exist fully without separating yourself. Silence continues to feel like a presence rather than an absence. It wraps around motion and gives it shape. Without silence, nothing would feel calm. But silence here is generous, patient, and kind. It allows thoughts to rise and fade naturally. Nothing echoes too loudly. Nothing lingers longer than it needs to. Even uncertainty feels different here. It is not something to be resolved quickly. It is simply space where future motion has not yet unfolded. The planets do not fear that space. They move into it gently, trusting that the same quiet laws will shape what comes next. There is no tension around not knowing. Let it go on. The way the universe never checks whether it has said enough. The planets continue without awareness of beginnings or endings, and that alone feels calming. Nothing marks a starting line. Nothing waits at a finish. Motion exists simply because balance exists, and balance exists without effort. There is no tension between staying and moving, both happen at the same time. Out there, nothing is urgent, because nothing is fragile. Even things that seem delicate from afar, thin rings, faint atmospheres, drifting dust, are held securely by time and space. If something changes, it does so slowly enough that it never feels like loss. It feels like adjustment, like settling. The universe is very good at letting things find their place again and again. The planets never rehearse disasters. They do not imagine what could go wrong. They move forward trusting the same gentle structure that has always held them. That trust is not emotional. It is built into reality itself. Gravity does not forget. Orbits do not suddenly fail. The next moment arrives smooth. That reliability feels like a soft floor beneath everything. Even emptiness feels kind. Where there is nothing, there is also no pressure, no demand, no friction. Movement becomes effortless in that openness. Rest becomes natural. Space does not ask to be filled. It allows things to float. That allowance feels like permission to pause, to slow, to let things be unfinished without anxiety. The planets show how consistency can be soothing rather than confining. The same motion repeated endlessly becomes a rhythm, and rhythm becomes comfort. There is no fear of monotony when repetition brings stability. Familiarity becomes a place to rest. Knowing what comes next allows the mind to stop scanning, stop racing, stop preparing. Light continues its gentle journey outward, never rushing, never forcing itself forward. By the time it reaches distant worlds, it has softened into something calm and silvery, barely warm, barely bright, just present. Darkness follows just as gently, not swallowing anything, simply opening space. Nothing is abrupt. Nothing demands. The idea of effort slowly fades. The planets do not try to stay in orbit. Staying in orbit is effortless because everything around them cooperates. Support is built in. Motion is supported. Rest is supported. There is no sense of carrying everything alone. The universe shares the weight. As this feeling lingers, thoughts naturally thin out. They become wider, slower, less crowded. Concerns lose their sharpness. The mind begins to behave like space itself, open, patient, unconcerned with filling every moment. Silence becomes comfortable. Stillness becomes welcoming. Nothing here needs improvement. Nothing needs to be optimized. The planets are not better today than they were yesterday, and that is perfectly fine. They are not progressing toward, they are simply continuing, and continuation itself is enough. There is no final calm waiting ahead. Calm is not something the universe arrives at. It is something the universe already is. The planets move within it, wrapped in it, supported by it, without ever needing to name it. And in imagining their slow, endless motion, that same calm becomes easier to feel, not as something distant, but as something already present, steady beneath everything. The planets glide on quietly, endlessly, without concern or commentary. Time stretches. Space opens. Nothing presses. Nothing pulls too hard. Everything is allowed to move at its own pace, and for as long as you stay with that rhythm, there is nothing else you need to do, nothing else you need to become. The calm simply continues. Let it keep unfolding the way a thought drifts when it no longer needs to reach a conclusion. The planets remain suspended in that quiet certainty, never tightening around their paths, never loosening either. Everything feels gently inevitable, not in a rigid way, but in a soft, reassuring one. The universe does not surprise itself. It unfolds the same way it always has, patiently, reliably, without asking anything to hurry along. Out there, nothing feels temporary, in a stressful way. Even things that change are given enormous amounts of time to do so. A surface erodes slowly enough that it feels like rest rather than decay. A climate shifts gradually enough that it feels like adjustment rather than loss. Nothing is taken away abruptly. Everything is eased into its next state with care, as if the universe understands that suddenness is unnecessary. The planets do not carry narratives. They are not stories of success or failure, growth or decline. They are simply states of balance held in motion. That absence of storyline feels deeply calming. There is no plot to keep up with, no arc to fulfill, no meaning that must be extracted. Existence does not have to explain itself, it just continues. Even vast emptiness feels protective rather than exposed. Space acts like a buffer, absorbing intensity, softening interactions, preventing things from colliding too quickly or too often. Distance becomes a form of safety. Silence becomes a form of care. Nothing intrudes unless time has made room for it. Everything arrives gently, if it arrives at all. The planets never ask if they are doing this right. They do not seek confirmation that they belong where they are. Their belonging is automatic, built into the structure of reality. That kind of belonging feels unconditional. It does not depend on effort, achievement, or awareness. It simply exists. Imagining that kind of belonging feels like releasing a long-held tension you didn't realize you were carrying. Time continues to feel wide and forgiving. A moment does not feel like something you can miss. It feels like something you can step into. Nothing rushes past. Everything lingers long enough to be fully experienced. Even movement feels slow enough to be kind. The universe seems in no hurry. As this awareness settles, the idea of needing to control anything begins to loosen. The planets do not manage their paths, yet they never lose them. They do not monitor their stability, yet stability remains. Support does not require supervision. Balance does not require vigilance. Everything works because it is allowed to work. The calm here is not fragile. It does not depend on everything being perfect or quiet. Storms can exist. Darkness can deepen. Change can continue. And still, calm remains as the underlying state, steady and unbothered. It is not something that disappears when activity begins. It is something that holds activity without strain. Nothing builds toward and nothing waits for a resolution. The universe does not rush towards silence or completion. It simply keeps moving gently, endlessly, without concern for arrival. The planets circle on, held by forces that do not tire and do not demand attention. Staying with that image feels like resting inside something vast and patient. There is no pressure to think, no need to conclude, no expectation to move faster. Everything already has room. Everything already has time. Everything is already supported. And so the calm continues, not deeper or louder, just broader, stretching out in all directions, smooth and uninterrupted, like an orbit with no visible beginning and no reason to end. Let it keep drifting, the way calm does when it no longer needs to convince anyone of its presence. The planets continue in their quiet agreement with space, never tightening their hold on motion, never drifting into chaos. Everything feels settled without being fixed, fluid without being unstable. The universe seems to understand exactly how much movement is enough, and never asks for more. Out there, nothing is overwhelmed by scale. Vastness does not intimidate, it reassures. The sheer amount of space means that no single moment has to carry too much weight. If something feels heavy, there is always room for it to spread out, to thin, to soften. Time works the same way, stretching gently so nothing needs to happen all at once. Pressure dissolves naturally when given enough room. The planets do not brace themselves against the unknown. They move forward without anticipation, trusting that whatever comes next will arrive gradually, not suddenly. There is no flinching at the future, no clinging to the past. Everything unfolds in a wide present that feels stable and generous. That sense of continuity removes fear without needing reassurance. Even stillness feels active in a calm way. A planet resting in apparent silence is still part of countless motions, spinning, orbiting, drifting through the galaxy. Yet none of that movement feels restless. It is motion without agitation, progress without urgency. The idea that you can move and still be at rest feels deeply comforting, like permission to stop striving while still continuing. The universe also seems very forgiving of pauses. Nothing punishes slowness, nothing demands acceleration. A moment can stretch, linger, repeat, and nothing breaks because of it. The planets do not rush their rotations or compress their seasons. They let each phase finish completely before the next begins. That completeness feels like closure without endings. Light continues to arrive patiently, wave after wave, never tiring, never insisting on attention. Darkness follows just as gently, not erasing anything, simply allowing rest. Stars remain steady in the distance, not flickering with urgency, not competing for notice. Everything shines quietly or not at all, and both states feel equally peaceful. As this calm continues, the mind naturally stops searching for the next thought. Awareness becomes wider, softer, less focused on edges. Silence feels supportive rather than empty. Space feels welcoming rather than distant. There is no need to fill the moment with meaning. Let it continue like a horizon that never gets closer, no matter how long you look at it. The planets remain suspended in that gentle certainty, never tightening around their motion, never loosening their place. Everything feels held without effort, as if the universe itself is doing the work so nothing else has to. There is no background tension in space, no subtle sense that even uncertainty feels calm, because time is vast enough to absorb it completely. The planets never store stress, whatever reaches them. Heat, cold, radiation, silence spreads out, thins and settles. Nothing piles up. Nothing overwhelms. Energy moves through them the way a slow breeze moves through an open field, touching everything lightly, and then this constant release is what keeps everything peaceful. Nothing clings. Nothing resists. Everything flows. Distance itself feels comforting here. Things are far apart, and that distance creates safety rather than isolation. There is room to exist without collision, room to move without interference. Each planet has its own space, its own pace, its own quiet environment, and nothing intrudes unless it is meant to. That kind of respectful separation feels deeply restful, like knowing you are not being watched, measured, or hurried. Even stillness feels alive. A planet that appears motionless is still moving perfectly, just too slowly to notice. That hidden motion carries a calming message. You do not have to feel busy to be progressing. Things can be happening beneath the surface without noise, without proof, without pressure. Growth does not always announce itself. Stability does not always feel active. The universe also seems very patient with imperfection. Orbits are not perfect circles. Rotations are not perfectly aligned. Surfaces are uneven and scarred, yet everything remains stable. Perfection is not required for harmony. Small irregularities are absorbed naturally into the larger balance. Nothing is rejected for being slightly off. Everything is included. As you stay with this feeling, the mind stops reaching outward for stimulation. Silence becomes enough. Space becomes enough. Even the idea of boredom fades, because there is nothing missing that needs to be filled. Awareness simply rests where it is, wide and unstrained. Thoughts slow down not because they are suppressed, but because there is no urgency driving them forward. The planets never prepare for the future or recover from the past. They do not carry regret in their craters or hope in their clouds. Everything that has happened is already integrated, already settled. Everything that will happen is far enough away to feel gentle rather than threatening. The present moment stretches wide enough to hold everything comfortably. Nothing about this calm, it does not depend on conditions being perfect. Storms can exist, darkness can last, silence can deepen. And still, balance remains. Calm is not something that breaks easily here. It is resilient precisely because it is slow, spacious, and patient. And so there is no ending to arrive at, no final peace to reach. The calm does not conclude. It continues. Like an orbit, it loops smoothly back into itself, carrying everything along without effort. The planets keep moving quietly and steadily, never asking for permission, never asking for reassurance. They simply exist within a universe that knows how to hold them. Resting in that image, even briefly, feels like being supported from all directions at once. Nothing presses. Nothing pulls too hard. Nothing needs immediate attention. Everything has time. Everything has space. Everything is already moving at exactly the right speed. And for a while, that is all there is. Let it drift on, the way space itself never feels the need to pause or conclude. The planets continue their motion with a kind of quiet confidence, never checking if they are being held, because being held is simply the nature of where they exist. Nothing trembles beneath them. Nothing threatens to give way. Stability is not something they maintain. It is something they are immersed in. Even the idea of effort feels distant here, almost unnecessary. Out there, everything feels evenly distributed. No single moment carries more weight than another. No instant is overloaded with meaning or expectation. Time spreads itself out so generously that each second feels spacious, unpressured, allowed to unfold fully before the next one arrives. The planets do not hurry through their days or nights. They let light arrive slowly. Let warmth linger. Let darkness settle without resistance. Each phase is met with the same quiet acceptance. The vastness surrounding them does not feel empty or cold. It feels like a deep cushion of space where nothing crowds too close. That openness allows motion to remain smooth, thoughts to remain soft, existence to remain uncomplicated. There is no sense of being boxed in or constrained. Everything has room to breathe. Everything has room to be exactly what it is. Even the forces that shape planets feel gentle. When stretched across such immense scales, gravity does not yank or snap. It curbs, it guides, it reassures. Change does not arrive as a shock. It arrives as a gradual shift, so slow it feels almost like rest. Mountains rise and fall without urgency. Atmospheres thicken or thin without drama. Surfaces transform without ever feeling like they are losing something important. The planets do not cling to their past forms or worry about their future ones. What they were has already settled into what they are, and what they will become is far enough away to feel peaceful rather than uncertain. The present moment expands, wide enough to hold everything comfortably. Nothing spills over, nothing presses. As this sense of calm deepens, the mind naturally follows. Thoughts slow, not because they are forced to, but because there is no reason to rush. Attention softens. Awareness widens. Even silence begins to feel full. like a quiet presence rather than an absence. Nothing feels missing. Nothing needs to be added. The planets never seek reassurance, yet they embody it. Their continued motion, unchanged for billions of years, offers a wordless promise that things can continue without strain. That movement does not require constant effort. That stability does not require control. That calm can exist even in vast, powerful systems. There is no final moment waiting ahead. No point where everything must finally make sense. The universe does not build toward a conclusion. It simply continues, gently, patiently, endlessly. The planets circle on, held by forces that do not rush and do not tire. And in imagining that steady, unbroken motion, it becomes easier to let go of the need to hurry, the need to resolve, the need to arrive. Everything is already moving. Everything is already supported. Time is wide. Space is kind. The calm does not end. It stretches on smooth and quiet, like an orbit that never needs a beginning or an end. Let it keep expanding as gently as the universe itself does, without asking permission or setting limits. The planets remain wrapped in that quiet steadiness, never tightening their grip on motion, never loosening it either. Everything feels perfectly held, like resting in deep water where buoyancy does the work for you. There is no strain in floating, no fear of sinking, just a soft agreement between weight and support. Space carries the planets the same way calm carries a quiet thought, without effort, without resistance. Nothing out there ever feels crowded. Even when many bodies move together, there is still room between them, space that absorbs pressure and keeps everything gentle. That spaciousness feels deeply reassuring. It suggests that there is always room to step back, to breathe, to let things spread out instead of pile up. The universe never compresses moments into urgency. It allows them to unfold one by one, slowly, kindly. The planets never hurry through experience. A sunrise can take days, shadows stretching and shifting so slowly they feel like stillness. A sunset does not rush to finish. It simply fades, color thinning into darkness without drama. Night arrives like rest, not like loss. Day returns like a quiet reminder, not a demand. Everything feels cyclical rather than linear, soft rather than sharp. Even power feels calm here. Massive gravity, immense pressure, endless motion. All of it exists without noise, without aggression. Strength does not need to announce itself. It simply works, consistently and quietly. That kind of power feels safe, like something you can lean into rather than protect yourself from. Nothing in space seems interested in overwhelming anything else. The planets, each rotation completes itself. Each orbit closes smoothly back into its beginning. There are no loose ends, no lingering urgency. The idea of latter loses its sharpness when everything naturally comes back around. Nothing is truly missed. It will return in its own time. That looping continuity feels like reassurance woven into motion itself. As this calm continues, the sense of time softens even more. Minutes stop feeling like units to manage. Moments stretch into something wider, more breathable. There is no pressure to fill them with meaning. Simply existing inside them feels enough. The mind no longer scans for the next thing. It rests where it is, supported by the same quiet rhythm that supports the planets. Silence remains steady, never awkward, never empty. It does not demand to be filled. It allows thoughts to rise and fade naturally, like clouds drifting across a vast sky that is never disturbed by them. Nothing sticks, nothing clings. Everything passes through gently. The planets continue their endless motion, not because they must, but because that is simply how balance expresses itself. There is no goal ahead of them. Let it keep unfolding, as gently as gravity itself, without any need for direction or destination. The planets never grip their motion tightly. They are carried by it, supported from every side by a universe that knows how to hold weight without strain. Nothing there feels like it could suddenly give way. Stability is not fragile. It is built deep into the fabric of space. Even when change happens, it arrives cushioned by time, softened until it feels natural rather than disruptive. There is a quiet kindness in how nothing demands immediate response. No planet is ever required to react faster, spin quicker, or move harder. Everything happens at the speed it needs, and that speed is always enough. The idea of catching up simply does not exist. Motion is not a race, it is a flow. Each world glides forward carried by rules that do not hurry and do not forget. The darkness between stars feels especially calm, not empty but open, like a wide field at night where nothing presses close. In that openness, there is room for stillness to stretch out fully. Thoughts can drift without colliding. Feelings can exist without crowding each other. Nothing has to be resolved right away. The universe is comfortable with things remaining unfinished for a very long time. Planets do not tense when they approach the closest point in their orbit, and they do not cling when they drift farther away. Nearness and distance are both accepted states. That gentle acceptance feels like permission to let relationships, moments, and emotions move naturally, without forcing closeness or fearing space. Everything has its own rhythm of coming nearer and drifting farther, and that rhythm is trusted. Even the idea of endurance feels different here. The planets endure not by resisting, but by yielding slightly, adjusting subtly, distributing forces so nothing becomes overwhelming. Strength is quiet. Resilience is soft. Nothing hardens unnecessarily over time. Sharp edges smooth themselves out. Extremes settle into balance. What once felt intense becomes simply part of the background. As this calm continues, it becomes clear that the universe does not reward urgency. It rewards balance. It does not demand constant motion. It allows steady motion. The planets move because support is already there. They do not exhaust themselves trying to stay in place. Staying in place is effortless because everything around them cooperates. The mind resting in this imagery naturally mirrors that cooperation. Resistance loosens, effort softens. The need to control the next moment fades. There is a sense of being carried rather than driving, of being held rather than Breathing becomes slower, deeper, less intentional. Awareness widens instead of sharpening. Nothing here is fragile. Nothing feels temporary in a frightening way. Change exists, but it is slow, predictable, kind. The future does not rush toward you. It arrives gradually, like light spreading across a surface that has waited patiently for it. There is no sudden arrival, no abrupt demand, and so the planets keep moving endlessly, quietly, without needing to arrive anywhere else. Their calm is not a mood. It is a state of being. Sitting with that state, even in imagination, feels like resting on something vast and steady. No effort is required. No conclusion is needed. Everything continues, supported, spacious, and unhurried. And in that continuation, there is a deep, wordless sense that everything is already okay. Let it flow on, the way planetary motion never pauses to check itself. Out there, nothing is trying to optimize or accelerate. The universe is not in a hurry to become something else. The planets exist in a state of quiet allowance, where each moment is permitted to unfold fully before the next one arrives. There is no compression of experience, no stacking of moments on top of each other. Time stretches wide enough for everything to settle gently into place. The planets do not resist the forces acting on them. They cooperate with them. Instead of fighting gravity, they lean into it. Instead of opposing motion, they follow it. That cooperation removes strain entirely. Nothing is wasted pushing against what already exists. Everything moves with what is, not against it. That idea alone carries a deep sense of relief, like realizing you don't need to struggle to be held. Even the most distant planets, barely warmed by sunlight, feel calm rather than abandoned. The faint light that reaches them is enough. It does not need to be brighter. It does not need to arrive faster. It simply touches softly, consistently, and then continues on its way. That gentleness makes the cold feel peaceful instead of harsh. Extremes lose their threat when they are stable and predictable. Planets also show how rest and motion can exist at the same time. They never stop moving, yet they are never restless. Their motion is smooth, circular, repetitive in a way that feels grounding rather than exhausting. There is no sharp beginning to a day, no abrupt end to a night. Everything blends. Transitions are gradual, almost unnoticeable. Change becomes something you sink into, not something you brace for. The longer you sit with this imagery, the more the idea of urgency begins to feel like a human invention rather than a universal truth. Nothing in space panics. Nothing rushes to prevent an outcome. Even events that seem dramatic from close up are softened by distance and time until they become part of a larger, calmer pattern. The universe is very good at absorbing intensity and returning to equilibrium. There is also comfort in how little explanation is required. The planets do not ask why they move. They simply do. They do not need reassurance that the next moment will arrive. It always does. That certainty does not come from belief or hope, but from structure. The universe is built to continue. That continuation feels steady, reliable, and deeply calming. As this sense of steadiness settles in, the mind naturally stops scanning for what might go wrong. There is nothing to fix here, nothing to anticipate. Awareness spreads out, becoming softer, less focused on edges. Silence no longer feels empty. It feels full of space. Stillness no longer feels like stopping. It feels like being supported. And still, nothing ends. The calm does not peak or fade. Like an orbit, it simply carries on, smooth and unbroken. The planets keep circling. The light keeps arriving gently. The darkness keeps opening wide. And everything remains held within a rhythm that has never needed to hurry. Sitting with that rhythm, even briefly, feels like resting inside something ancient and patient, where nothing is demanded, nothing is missing, and everything is allowed to move exactly as slowly as it needs to. Let it keep going, like a slow current that never reaches a shore. The planets never gather tension in their movement. They glide as if supported by something infinitely patient. There is no sense of effort in how they exist, no strain hidden beneath the surface. Even their weight feels comfortably held, balanced perfectly by the space around them. Nothing presses too hard, nothing slips away. Everything rests exactly where it belongs. Out there, the idea of urgency feels completely unnecessary. A planet never wonders if it should be somewhere else by now. It never measures progress or worries about delay. Wherever it is in its orbit is not a step toward something better or worse. It is simply a moment that is complete in itself. That completeness, there is no rushing forward and no longing backward. Each position is equally valid, equally calm. Space itself feels like permission. Permission to slow down, permission to leave things unfinished. Permission to exist without explanation. The planets take up space without apology, surrounded by emptiness that does not threaten them or demand they fill it. That emptiness feels like a cushion, absorbing everything that might otherwise feel sharp. Silence wraps around motion and softens it, the way deep water softens sound. Even repetition becomes comforting here. The same arc traced again and again does not dull the experience. It deepens it. Familiarity brings ease. Knowing what comes next allows the mind to rest instead of anticipate. The planets repeat their paths not because they are trapped, but because those paths are gentle. Repetition becomes a kind of rest, a steady rhythm that carries everything forward without effort. Light continues to arrive quietly, spreading across surfaces that have waited without impatience. It never overwhelms. It never demands. It simply touches, warms, and moves on. Darkness follows just as gently, not as an absence, but as a pause. Stars remain steady in the distance, offering quiet points of reference that never flicker with anxiety. Nothing asks to be noticed. Everything simply is. The idea of control fades naturally in this vast calm. The planets do not control their motion, and yet they are perfectly guided. They are not steering, yet they never drift into chaos. That balance, being held without being controlled, feels deeply reassuring. It suggests that support does not have to feel restrictive, and freedom does not have to feel unstable. As you linger in this imagined stillness, the body seems to recognize something familiar. Breathing slows without instruction. Muscles release without effort. Thoughts lose their urgency and begin to space themselves out, like objects floating gently apart. There is no need to focus or concentrate. Awareness widens instead, becoming soft and spacious. Nothing here asks for a conclusion. The planets do not build toward an ending. They continue, smooth and unbroken, carrying their calm forward endlessly. Their motion has no deadline, no finish line, no moment where everything must finally resolve. It is enough to keep moving gently. Let that sense of ease continue unfolding, as if there is no boundary where it needs to stop. The planets never ask whether they are doing enough. Their existence is not measured in productivity or progress, only in presence. Each moment of their motion is complete on its own, needing no justification. Even when nothing seems to be happening, something important is still occurring. Balance is being maintained, space is being honored, time is being allowed to pass without resistance. That idea alone feels like rest for the mind. Out there, repetition is not a trap but a comfort. The same path traced again and again becomes a source of stability, not monotony. Familiarity softens everything. Knowing what comes next removes the need to brace yourself. The planets never feel trapped by their orbits. Those orbits are what allow them to exist peacefully. Freedom and structure are not opposites in space. They support each other gently, like rails that make smooth movement possible rather than restrictive. Even uncertainty feels calmer when held by such vastness. A planet does not need to know what the universe will look like in a billion years to continue moving today. It trusts that the same quiet rules will keep working just as they always have. That trust is not hopeful or fearful. It is neutral, steady, grounded. Nothing is imagined to be worse or better than it is. Things simply are, and that neutrality removes the sharp edges from thought. Light and shadow continue their slow exchange, never fighting for dominance. One fades as the other arrives, each taking its turn without resentment. Darkness is not a threat, it is a pause. Light is not a demand, it is a gentle offering. The cycle repeats endlessly, soothing in its predictability, reassuring in its balance. There is no need to hold on to either. Both return in their own time. The planets also show how resilience does not have to look like effort. They endure radiation, impacts, extreme temperatures, and silence without hardening themselves. They do not become tense from what they carry. Everything is absorbed gradually, distributed evenly, softened by time. Nothing overwhelms all at once. Even stress, when spread across millions of years, loses its sharpness and becomes just another layer in a long, quiet story. As this image settles deeper, the idea of urgency begins to feel unnatural, almost foreign. There is no countdown in space, no deadline approaching, no moment that must be seized before it disappears. Moments do not vanish. They blend into one another. The future is not a cliff edge, but a continuation of the same gentle motion. That realization allows the body to relax without being told to, allows the mind to slow without forcing it. And so the planets keep going, not toward something, not away from anything, just continuing. Their calm is not something they try to maintain. It is simply the result of being held by a universe. Sitting with that thought feels like leaning back into something solid and quiet. Nothing presses, nothing pulls too hard. Everything is already in motion, already supported, already allowed to be exactly as it is. And for a while that is more than enough. Let it continue without trying to shape it. The way the universe never tries to improve its own calm. The planets never hold their breath. Expansion and contraction, warmth and cooling, light and shadow, all flow in and out with no resistance. Nothing is clenched. Nothing is forced to stay longer than it should. Even gravity feels less like a pull and more like a gentle agreement to stay close without losing freedom. The planets lean into that agreement effortlessly, trusting it completely. There is a quiet dignity in how nothing seeks attention. No planet announces its presence or tries to stand out from the others. Each one reflects light differently, carries its own textures and colors, and yet none compete. Difference exists without comparison. Variety exists without judgment. That absence of comparison feels deeply restful, like stepping out of a room where everything had to be evaluated. In space, existence does not need ranking. Everything belongs simply because it exists. The longer you stay with this thought, the more time begins to feel circular rather than linear. There is no sense of falling behind or racing ahead. Past and future soften into a continuous flow, where nothing is lost and nothing is rushing toward you. The planets have been where they are before and will be there again, and that repetition feels safe rather than limiting. It suggests that even if you drift slightly off course, there is always a way back into balance, slowly, gently, without punishment. It does not press down, it opens outward. In that silence, thoughts have room to stretch and thin out until they no longer feel crowded. Concerns float instead of sink. Emotions spread evenly instead of piling up. The mind begins to behave more like space itself, wide, accepting, unbothered by emptiness. Nothing needs to fill every moment. Nothing needs to be solved immediately. The planets do not resist change, but they do not chase it either. Change arrives when conditions are right, not when impatience demands it. That patience feels like a quiet wisdom written into the structure of everything. Mountains rise and fall. Atmospheres thicken or fade. Surfaces reshape themselves grain by grain. All of it happens without anxiety, without commentary, without regret. What was needed once gives way to what is needed next. And the transition is so slow it never feels like loss. As this awareness settles, the body seems to follow naturally. Breathing deepens without instruction. Muscles soften without being told to relax. The nervous system recognizes something familiar in this rhythm, as if it has always known that life does not need to be lived at maximum speed. The planets do not rush to justify their existence, and in their quiet confidence, they offer the same permission. Nothing concludes, nothing demands closure. Like an orbit with no visible start or end, the calm simply continues, smooth and uninterrupted. The universe does not hurry toward a final moment. It allows every moment to be complete on its own, and resting in that idea, even briefly, feels like floating, supported from all sides, moving gently forward without needing to know where you are going. Trusting that the same steady forces holding the planets will continue to hold you too. Let the calm roll on, unbroken, like an orbit with no first step and no final point. The planets never brace themselves against existence. They meet each moment with the same quiet openness. Nothing startles them. Nothing overwhelms them all at once, even when forces act upon them. Those forces are distributed, softened, spread gently across vast surfaces and immense spans of time. Pressure becomes balance. Weight becomes grounding. Motion. A planet is never late to its position, never anxious about where it should be. Wherever it is in its path is exactly right, simply because it is there. That sense of correctness without effort feels deeply reassuring. It suggests that there is no wrong place to be in a moment, no need to rush into alignment. Alignment happens naturally when things are allowed to move honestly at their own pace. The universe does not crowd the planets with information. There are no alerts, no signals demanding immediate response. Light arrives gently. Gravity works quietly. Time passes without commentary. This absence of constant input allows everything to remain steady. Nothing is overstimulated. Nothing is pushed beyond its capacity. The planets live within their limits comfortably, never straining to exceed them, never shrinking away from what they can hold. Even vastness itself feels kind. The enormous scale of space does not feel threatening. It feels spacious, like a long exhale that never quite finishes. There is always more room than needed, more time than required, more silence than noise. In that abundance, tension has nowhere to gather. It thins out, spreads, dissolves. The idea of pressure begins to feel unnecessary, almost artificial. The planets also show how consistency can be gentle, rather than rigid. Their movements repeat. Yes, but each repetition is slightly different, shaped by subtle shifts, tiny influences, gradual changes. Stability does not mean sameness. It means continuity. That continuity feels soothing, like knowing the ground will still be there when you step forward, even if the scenery slowly changes. Knowing a planet does not need to understand why gravity works to trust it. It does not need to see the entire orbit to continue moving along it. There is a quiet faith written into motion itself, a confidence that the next moment will arrive just as smoothly as the last. That faith is not emotional or intellectual. It is structural. It is built into the way things exist. As this feeling settles deeper, the mind stops reaching outward and begins to widen instead. Thoughts no longer cluster tightly, they drift apart, leaving space between them. Silence becomes comfortable. Stillness becomes supportive. You realize that nothing important is being missed in this quiet, that rest itself is a form of participation in the rhythm of things. The planets continue, indifferent to observation, unchanged by attention, steady in their paths. They do not hold lessons intentionally, yet they offer one simply by being what they are, that life can move forward without strain, that time can pass without pressure, that existence can be spacious, patient, and kind. And in imagining them, gliding, circling, resting in motion, you find that calm does not need to be created or chased. Let that rhythm carry on, like a slow tide that never pulls too far in either direction. And notice how nothing in the planetary dance ever feels sharp or sudden. Every curve is rounded, every transition eased, as if the universe itself prefers softness over edges. The planets never collide in panic, because their paths are generous, wide, and forgiving, allowing mistakes to gently resolve long before they become problems. Even uncertainty feels calm out there, because time is abundant and corrections happen naturally. A planet can drift slightly and over thousands of years settle back into balance without stress or urgency. There is no alarm system, no sense of failure, only quiet adjustment. The idea of waiting loses its weight when you think in planetary time. Waiting is not something endured, it is simply how things happen. Dawn arrives when it arrives. Seasons shift when they are ready. Nothing is delayed because nothing is expected sooner. This alone feels deeply soothing, like permission to stop measuring your worth against speed. The planets never prove themselves. They simply continue. Their consistency is not repetitive in a dull way, but comforting, like a familiar sound that lets the mind wander safely. Even extremes feel strangely gentle when held in this vast context. Crushing pressure deep inside a planet exists alongside perfect calm on its surface. Violent storms can spin endlessly without threatening anything beyond their own skies. Intensity is contained, localized, never spilling into everything else. The universe seems very good at keeping things where they belong. That containment feels reassuring, like knowing that strong emotions or difficult moments don't have to consume everything. Light itself behaves with kindness. It never arrives all at once. It spreads, diffuses, softens by the time sunlight reaches the outer planets. It is no longer harsh or bright, but faint and silvery, like a memory rather than a demand. Shadows blur gently at the edges. Colors fade rather than end. Nothing feels abrupt. Even darkness is not heavy. It is open, spacious, filled with distant points of light that never flicker in anxiety. Planets also carry an unspoken lesson about solitude. They exist alone, yet never lonely, surrounded by space that does not judge or intrude. That solitude feels complete, self-sufficient, peaceful. Moons accompany some worlds, not out of necessity, but as quiet companions, sharing the journey without expectation. Distance does not weaken connection. It makes it calmer. As this image lingers, a sense of needing to arrive somewhere slowly dissolves. There is nowhere the planets are trying to get to. Their motion is the destination. That realization settles the mind like warm air, easing the tightness around future plans and past worries. The universe does not rush toward an ending. It expands, it circles, it repeats, and somehow remains endlessly patient with itself. In that patience, there is a deep kind of rest, not sleep, not stopping, but a steady, supportive rest that exists even while things move. The planets embody that state perfectly, gliding without effort, held without tension, changing without fear. And as you imagine them continuing on their ancient paths, unchanged by observation, untouched by concern, it becomes easier to believe that calm is not something you have to create, but something you can gently return to again and again at the same unhurried pace as the world's moving quietly above. Let the thought drift even farther, beyond any sense of ending, where the idea of enough no longer exists, and calm simply continues. The planets never reach a point where they are finished or incomplete. They are always whole in every moment of their motion. Their presence does not depend on attention, observation, or meaning. They would continue exactly the same, even if no one ever thought about them again. And that quiet independence feels deeply reassuring. Nothing about existence out there feels fragile. Orbits do not feel like tightropes. They feel like wide, gentle arcs with plenty of room for balance. Even mistakes, if they happen, are absorbed slowly by time, softened, until they are no longer mistakes at all, just part of the shape of things. There is a softness to the way planets hold their history. Billions of years are layered gently into rock and cloud, not as memories that hurt, but as depth. The past does not press down. It simply rests beneath. Nothing is rushed away. Nothing is clung to too tightly. Each rotation wipes the surface clean in light and shadow, again and again, offering quiet renewal without drama. Days pass without being counted. Nights arrive without being feared. Everything feels allowed. Even the Sunday's pull, which holds the entire system together. It is steady, predictable, constant, never tightening its grip, never letting go too suddenly. The planets respond without resistance, moving in trust rather than obedience. That relationship feels calm, cooperative, mutual, No force feels aggressive. Everything feels agreed upon. The universe seems to prefer cooperation over control, balance over dominance. As you stay with this feeling, the idea of scale becomes almost comforting. Problems that once felt large begin to feel smaller, not because they disappear, but because they are no longer surrounded by urgency. The planets show that size does not equal stress, that vastness can be gentle. A giant world can float peacefully. A small one can remain stable for eons. There is no hierarchy of calm. The emptiness between worlds feels like rest itself. Nothing fills it unnecessarily. Nothing crowds it. That openness allows motion without friction, thought without pressure. It feels like a reminder that space in your own life, mental or emotional, is not something to fear. Space is where balance happens. Space is what allows movement to feel easy. The planets never rehearse the future or replay the past. They do not anticipate collisions or mourn old shapes. They simply continue, moment by moment, rotation by rotation, trusting that the same laws that held them yesterday will hold them tomorrow. The trust feels ancient, deeper than belief, deeper than hope. It is not optimism, it is stability. And so the calm does not end. It doesn't need a conclusion or a final thought. Like the planets themselves, it just keeps going smooth and unbroken, offering a steady background against which everything else can soften. Nothing needs to be fixed right now. Nothing needs to be proven. Everything is already in motion, already held, already allowed to take as much time as it needs. Let the stillness stretch on without any need to measure it, the way planetary motion never measures itself. Space does not feel scarce, and time does not feel expensive. The planets exist inside an abundance, so vast that pressure simply dissolves. Even the idea of too much or not enough loses meaning when every world is exactly as full as it needs to be. Their mass, their speed, their distance. All of it rests in a quiet equilibrium that never asks to be improved. This natural completeness feels deeply calming, like realizing you don't actually need to add anything to be okay. Planets also teach a gentle lesson about silence, not the kind of silence that feels awkward or empty, but a silence that feels supportive, like a soft background that allows everything else to settle. In that silence, nothing competes for attention. There are no sudden interruptions, no sharp sounds, no urgency to respond. Motion happens without noise. Change happens without announcement. Even the most dramatic events, when viewed across enough time, dissolve back into stillness. Calm always returns. There is something soothing about how predictable everything is. Orbits repeat with incredible rotations continue without forgetting themselves. This reliability does not feel boring. It feels safe. Knowing that something will behave the same way tomorrow as it did today allows the mind to relax its constant scanning for danger or surprise. The planets never surprise themselves. They never wake up unsure of how to move. Their certainty is built into the structure. Even distance feels kind rather than cold. Being far apart does not mean being disconnected. It means having room to exist fully. Each planet has its own space, its own pace, its own conditions, and none of these need to match any other. Differences are not problems. They are simply variations of balance. One world can be frozen, another burning, another wrapped in clouds, and all of them remain equally valid, equally stable. That quiet acceptance feels like a deep breath. The universe never exhales too quickly. The longer you imagine this slow, endless motion, the more the idea of rushing feels out of place. Speed starts to seem unnecessary, almost strange. Why hurry when things naturally arrive? Why push when gravity already guides? The planets do not chase outcomes. They trust process. Their existence suggests that moving steadily is not only enough, it is ideal. As this calm continues to unfold, it becomes less like something you are observing and more like something you are inside. Thoughts drift more slowly. Tension loosens without being forced. The mind stops trying to reach the next moment and rests in the current one. Just as planets don't need to think to stay in orbit, you don't need to strain to stay grounded. Everything that holds you is already there, and still nothing ends. There is no final scene, no closing moment. The planets do not conclude. Their calm is not a destination, but a state, one that persists quietly, endlessly, in imagining them. You borrow a little of that state, steady, unhurried, supported. Drift a little longer in that calm, where the idea of urgency feels distant and unnecessary. And notice how the planets never argue with their place in space. Each one follows a path shaped long before memory, curves so smooth they feel inevitable, like a river that never questions the direction of the sea. Their movements are not driven by desire or fear, only by balance, and that balance never needs to be checked or corrected. Even when a planet wobbles slightly, gravity responds gently, guiding it back into harmony without force. There is something deeply soothing in knowing that nothing out there is lost. Nothing is late. Nothing is trying to catch up. The planets do not hold tension. Their immense mass rests comfortably within itself, supported by the quiet pull of space. Heat flows outward, cold settles inward. Storms rise and dissolve, all without resistance. On distant worlds, winds circle endlessly, not rushing to finish, not trying to escape, just moving because movement is natural. Ice forms slowly, crystal by crystal, and stays for ages, never in a hurry to melt. Rock cracks over millions of years, not in stress, but in acceptance of time. Even light behaves gently, spreading out, thinning, softening, as it travels farther from the Sunday, touching planets with exactly the amount of warmth they can hold. There is no sharpness in space, no sudden interruptions, only gradual transitions that feel almost like falling asleep. The planets exist in a kind of trust, leaning into gravity without fear of falling, spinning without concern for dizziness, orbiting without ever wondering where the path leads. Their repetition is not boring. It is comforting, like a familiar sound in the background that lets the mind rest. Nothing out there expects anything from them, and yet everything remains beautifully organized. The emptiness between planets is not absence but breathing room. A reminder that space itself is generous. In that vastness, even the largest planet feels light, floating without effort, supported by nothing but the laws that quietly hold the universe together. The planets never look back, never anticipate what comes next. Each moment of their existence is complete on its own. They remind us that being steady is not the same as being stuck, and that moving slowly does not mean fall. As they continue their endless, silent journeys, they seem to whisper the same gentle truth again and again. There is time, there is space, there is balance, and everything is allowed to unfold exactly as it is meant to, without pressure, without noise, without hurry. Stay with that feeling a little longer, as if floating beside the planets while they keep doing exactly what they have always done. Nothing pulls too hard. Nothing lets go completely. Everything is held in a soft middle state that feels endlessly safe. The planets do not need motivation to keep moving, and they never experience doubt about whether their path is correct. Their certainty comes not from thinking, but from simply existing within a system that supports them. Even when space is cold beyond imagination, that cold is stable, quiet and gentle, not sharp or hostile. Warmth from the Sunday fades, gradually, never disappearing suddenly, allowing each world to settle into its own comfortable balance of light and shadow. Surfaces cool slowly after long days, releasing heat back into space like a long, calm breath. On worlds with thick atmospheres, clouds drift without urgency, reshaping themselves endlessly without ever needing to arrive anywhere. On airless worlds, stillness reigns completely, dust unmoving, craters unchanged, time resting rather than passing. There is something profoundly calming about how little changes from one moment to the next. A single second means nothing to a planet, and even 1,000 years barely registers. This scale dissolves the idea that anything must be solved immediately. The universe clearly has patience to spare. Orbits repeat so precisely that future positions can be predicted centuries in advance. A quiet promise that tomorrow will arrive just as smoothly as today. Nothing out there rushes the sunrise or delays the night. Everything happens when it happens. Even the Sunday, burning with unimaginable energy, releases its light steadily without bursts or demands, nourishing its planets with consistent warmth. The planets carry scars from ancient impacts. Yet those scars rest peacefully now, no longer events, just textures in the landscape. Past violence has settled into calm geometry, circles within circles, softened by time. Rings around distant worlds shimmer quietly, countless fragments, moving together without touching, proof that harmony does not require unity, only rhythm. Moons rise and fall in slow, predictable arcs, never surprising, always returning. Tides respond gently, not as commands, but as conversations between gravity and motion. In this vast system, nothing feels judged or measured. No planet is considered successful or failing. None are early or late bloomers. They exist without labels, without expectations, without pressure to improve. Their value, simply by being there, they contribute to the balance of everything else. Even emptiness plays its role, offering silence, distance, and rest, letting the mind mirror that pace feels natural, like settling into a rhythm that was always there beneath the noise. Thoughts slow down, stretch out, lose their sharp edges. Concerns feel smaller when placed against movements that have continued flawlessly for billions of years. The planets don't promise answers or solutions. They offer something quieter and deeper reassurance. They show that stability exists, that systems can hold, that motion does not mean chaos. In their endless, gentle circling, they invite you to release urgency, soften your focus, and trust that, like them, You are already part of something steady, patient, and quietly enough. Let the calm widen again, like space itself stretching without resistance, and notice how the planets never carry excess weight beyond what they can naturally hold. Everything about them feels perfectly measured, not by intention, but by balance. Their gravity is strong enough to gather, yet gentle enough to allow freedom, teaching that holding on does not have to mean trapping. Each rotation feels like a quiet affirmation, a steady "this is enough," repeated endlessly without boredom. Even their shadows move slowly, sliding across surfaces in a way that feels more like drifting fabric than the ticking of a clock. Nothing snaps into place. Everything eases. The farther you imagine drifting, the more obvious it becomes that space itself is forgiving. Distances are vast, giving every world room to exist without interference. No planet crowds another. No orbit overlaps in impatience. This generous spacing creates a sense of privacy, as if every planet is allowed its own quiet room in the universe. Silence there is not empty. It is full of stillness, full of permission to rest. Even radiation and cosmic particles move calmly, dispersed, never overwhelming any single place. The planets also carry a kind of emotional neutrality that feels deeply soothing. They do not celebrate when things go well or panic when conditions are harsh. A storm can rage for centuries and still be just another feature of the landscape, not a crisis, not a failure. Calm is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of urgency. Watching a planet endure extremes without distress subtly teaches the mind to loosen its grip on reaction. Time around planets feels thick and slow, almost tangible. A moment stretches, expands, becomes spacious enough to breathe inside. You realize that nothing is asking you to hurry. Nothing is demanding resolution right now. Just as planets are allowed to take millions of years to cool, shift, and settle, there is permission here to move at your own natural pace. Even change is unthreatening when it arrives this slowly. There is comfort in knowing that the same laws apply everywhere, quietly and fairly. Gravity does not favor one planet over another. It simply works. Orbits do not need to be maintained or remembered. They persist automatically. This reliability feels like a soft foundation beneath everything, something you can lean on without effort. No planet ever has to wonder if the universe will still hold it tomorrow. As you linger in this imagined stillness, thoughts naturally grow quieter, less sharp, more spread out. Problems that felt heavy begin to feel distant, not because they vanish, but because they no longer fill the entire space of the planets. Never try to solve anything, and yet everything remains in order. That realization alone feels like rest. In the end, the most relaxing thing about planets may be how unconcerned they are with being relaxing at all. They simply exist steady and unbothered, and in doing so, they offer a gentle invitation to slow down, to release pressure, to trust that movement does not require struggle, and that it is possible to keep going, quietly and peacefully, without ever forcing the next step. Sink even deeper into that spacious quiet, where the idea of effort begins to dissolve, and everything feels supported without explanation. The planets never brace themselves